It's April the 29th, 2021, and our reading today is in the book of Ruth, and we begin in chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Kilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Kilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you've shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband, even if I thought there was still hope for me. Even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Amen. Well, I think it's rather important and certainly extremely interesting as we begin this series on Ruth, our daily readings for the next few days, to understand that in the Hebrew Bible, as opposed to our English Bible, Ruth does not occur at this point. Let me just show you. The Hebrew Bible is called by Jews to this day the Tanakh. This is what we call the Old Testament. And Tanakh because of the 3 major parts of the Old Testament, represented by the letters T, Ta, N, Tana, K, Ka, Tanakh. The T bit, of course, we're very familiar with this, the Torah, Genesis to Deuteronomy. Then the N is the Navi'im, the prophets. There are the former prophets, Joshua to 2 Kings. We usually call those the history books of the Old Testament, but Jews don't. They call them prophetic books, the earlier ones, because although it's history, it's God speaking prophetically into the lives of his people still today. And then what we usually call the prophetic books, Isaiah to Micah. But then the K, this is the bit that interests us now, the Ketuvim, the writings. And see where Ruth fits in. We have the Psalms, the Proverbs, the book of Job, and then a little subsection within this called the Scrolls. Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, Esther. And then at the end of the Old Testament, this is how the Hebrew Old Testament ends. The book of Daniel is in here, not in the prophets, but in the writings. And then Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles 1, Chronicles 2. This section called the Scrolls is, and linked with Proverbs and Job, is often called wisdom literature. And interestingly, that's where we find the book of Ruth in the Hebrew Bible. Well, I think it's quite important to appreciate that, because as we come to this book of Ruth, it certainly is history. These things really happened. It is prophecy in the sense that it speaks directly into our lives today as to how we should live, but also it is a book of wisdom, how to live wisely or not, as the case might be. And I think it begins in that way. How wise was it really in these days of folly and darkness? Verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled, we've seen this is a time of unprecedented, there we are, nice word, unprecedented decline and disaster for Israel. And also now this terrible disaster has hit. There was famine in the land. But in the light of that, how wise was the decision that Elimelech made? This man who is from Bethlehem, that's obviously significant. How wise was it of him to take his wife and his 2 sons, to leave the promised land and to go just over the border into Moab? They could see it on the horizon. How wise was it for him and for them to leave the promised land and go into a pagan land? Verses 1 to 3. The Moabites were Israel's enemies. Why would you do that? Well, we've seen, because they were under pressure. It was almost life-threatening, this famine. And maybe he reasoned like this. Well, look, Moab is just over the border. We'll only go for a little while. We'll get the supplies that we need. At the moment, they're doing fine over there. There's abundance of provision there. We'll get what we need. We'll spend a few weeks or a few months maximum, and then we'll quickly make our way back. God's people often reason like that. It sounds good. It sounds the right thing to do. But there's such a thing in life called the law of unintended consequences. And we could say here, the law of tragic unintended consequences. This man dies while they're there, verse 3. His sons marry 2 Moabite women. Obviously, that's against the Torah, the first part of the law. They're settling down. They've moved into the neighborhood now. And now they are trapped. They might have gone thinking they could spend a few weeks, a few months, and then they could make up their mind and they'd be free to come back. How long do they spend there in total? Verse 3, it says, they lived there about 10 years. We could have easily read that and skipped over that. Let that sort of settle on your mind and on your heart for a moment. That phrase, 10 years. And tragedy piles up upon tragedy. The two sons die next. You see, if only they'd trusted in the Lord, if only they'd stayed in that one place on planet Earth that God said, I will be there. I will bless my people. I will provide for them in their need. If only they'd stayed there, praying, looking to the Lord, hanging on to his promises. Eventually, he would have provided, as we read in verse 6. When she, Naomi, heard that in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. So now, after all the heartache and the tragedy, which I think we have to say these people have brought on themselves, now it's time to return. Return. Did you notice how in that reading, so often that word and various variations on that word, like go home or go back or turn back or whatever, that's the dominant word really in this chapter, returning. And surely, just as they've moved away from the promised land into a pagan land and are going to return to their homeland, surely it's not just a geographical return. There's also something deep and spiritual going on. They've strayed away from the Lord. And now they're coming back home to God. And of course, Naomi's going to do that without these two lovely pagan daughters-in-law. Verses 8 to 9. That's why she says to them, you go back to your homes now. You go back to your pagan gods now. I mean, there's nothing more important in our culture, is there? This was true then, than to be married, have children, be settled, be taken care of. Of course you've got to do that. Well, Orpah does, verses 11 to 14, but verses 15 to 18, we're told that Ruth clings to Naomi because the miracle that is really at the heart of the book and at the heart of the Bible in so many, many ways, of a Gentile woman clinging not only to a woman of Israel, but clinging to the God of Israel. That's what she's come to do, this woman, Ruth. She has indeed returned in the sense of repented. She's been converted. And she will not let Naomi go. And she gives her testimony in verse 16. Some of the most exquisite words in the Bible. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God, my God. And so verses 19 to 22, they return home to Bethlehem. She is recognized, this lady, Naomi. I mean, she's been on this road of suffering for many years. She is no doubt marked and changed by that. She is a changed woman. But they still recognize her. She's still Naomi. But she says, no, don't call me Naomi. I want to change my name now in the light of my experiences. I want you to call me Mara, which means bitter or bitterness. Not because she is bitter against God, No, I don't think that's there in the text. Rather, she is like Job, isn't she? Experiencing bitterness brought into her life by those afflictions which she acknowledges have come from God. It's exactly what she says in verses 20 and 21. A God who is sovereign, a God who is good, a God who is loving. The afflictions come to her from the hand of God, but in many ways they're also as a result of her own waywardness, and I think her husband and the decisions and the choices that they've made. Yeah. So God is dealing fairly with her and in discipline with her. But in acknowledging him, that's also where she finds hope. So she's honest, she's realistic about pain and difficulty and the bitterness of affliction. But she's also not bitter against God. She hasn't abandoned God. She's not angry. She's not turned her back on him. She's acknowledging him. She's trusting in him. She's accepting that what she's done and the way she's gone has been wrong. And she's come back home. She's returned to her God, and she's returned back to Bethlehem. God is at work, and she comes back home amazingly with Ruth by her side. And when do they arrive back? The timing of it is astonishing. Arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. This is a time of harvest. This is a time of fruitfulness. This is a time of something new, something fresh, something beautiful that's going to be birthed out of a season of pain and difficulty. There's deep symbolism in all of that, but also a wonderful illustration written over the whole Bible, the whole of history, but particularly in a special sort of way. One of the things that makes this love story of the book of Ruth so precious to so many people. Written over it is one of the greatest promises and statements in the whole Bible, Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.